The Minolta Rokkor 58mm 1.2 lens is an iconic piece of glass from the past, and it continues to make a very clear statement in the present. This vintage marvel, originally designed for Minolta's own 35mm SLR cameras, carries with it a rich history and an incredible reputation for creating stunning images. And today we're pairing it with a small Fuji Xe4, as well as the svelte GFX 50R. Buckle up, this is going to be a ride through history, image quality, and some interesting facts you may not have known. Alright gang, let's talk a little bit of history. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, lens manufacturers were enduring an almost arms race to one-up each other with faster and faster glass. Ultimately, I think most people can agree that Canon ended up winning this race with the introduction of the Dream lens, the 50mm f/0.95 lens in 1961, but that didn't stop other manufacturers from offering fast lenses like a 51.2, because the Canon Dream lens in today's dollars costs about $4,000. Interesting note, if you try to go out and buy one today, that's about what it costs as well, so talk about holding your value. But if you wanted a fast lens and didn't want to spend $4,000, well, other manufacturers like Minolta had offerings for you. But 60 years ago, who cares, right? Why are we interested in fast lenses in the first place? Well, to answer that question, you need to look at film at the time. Now, if black and white film was your thing, you were in luck. Modern black and white film was pushing the boundaries of ISO sensitivity. An Ilford HP5 of the time was around ISO 800. But if you wanted to adopt color photography, things became a little bit more difficult. The original Kodachrome film was ASA 10, and Kodachrome 2 after that, another color film, was ISO 25. That's 25, not 125. So now we start to see the importance of fast glass in photography at this time. Now for a little bit of trivia, and don't say you never learned anything here on Heritage Focus. Did you know there's a radioactive version of this lens? Yep. The earlier models of the Rokkor 58 1.2 used thoriated glass, which is mildly radioactive. A number of the other lenses of the era use the same radioactive element as well, so it's not unique to the Rokkor, but not to worry, unless you're planning to ingest the lens, it's not going to be harmful at all. Disclaimer, don't eat your lens. Okay. Enough of the lens history, so let's get into how this half-century-old lens performs on modern mirrorless cameras. Alright, here we are in Capture 1. We're going to take a look at these images. We'll start with the Xe4 and the APS-C size sensor, and then we're going to move to the GFX. Taking a look right off the bat here, you see what I really enjoy on the Xe4 and the Rokkor 58 is this kind of gentle focus fall off. Center sharpness at f1.2, it leaves a little bit to be desired. It's not a modern lens, but it does have a really nice and gentle focus fall off. You'll see some fringing here. We've got purple and green fringing on the high contrast areas, but overall, a really nice and pleasing image. And you'll notice here, the vignette, which we'll talk about on the GFX sensor a little bit more, is not really present. There's not a whole lot here as far as vignette. This is a full edge-to-edge shot, and it looks very clean. So moving along, and I should call out, we've got the EXIF information over here if you want to dig into anything in specific. And of course, you can download these files for your own viewing at heritagefocus.org. All right, moving over actually to a shot of the microphone I'm currently using here, the Shure MV7. You can see in the background, I just wanted to show some out of focus rendering. You've got some nice highlights in here, not absolutely circular at f1.2, almost a little rounded, or I'm sorry, corner edges here, not perfectly round, but still very pleasing the way this kind of rolls out. Not necessarily a cat's eye bokeh or onion ring, anything going on here, just a nice pleasing out of focus transition area. And just for reference, the microphone was probably a foot away from the camera. The background here, this is a door and some shelving. That's probably 3 to 4 feet away from probably closer to 4 feet away from the microphone. All right, here we are taking a look at the next image. We've got some textbooks here. We've got the old Browning camera. One of the things I wanted to notice here with this image is that as you start to get into that fall off and out of focus area at 1.2, it can get a little busy, and we'll see this later on with some other images. But back here with our little Big Ben teapot or whatever this is, we've got some fringing happening, and you start to get just an idea that if you have a lot of detailed information in the background, the out of focus can be a little busy. Center sharpness here is, again, nothing to write home about, but still, certainly acceptable. This kind of reminds me of almost a 35 millimeter Summilux before the aspheric. It's sharp, but it's not super sharp, not clinical, and it does have a bit of a dreamy fall off to it, which I think is one of the characteristics people enjoy about this lens. Moving forward, you've got a shot here of the Canon AE1. Nothing really to write home about here other than you see some additional fringing at the high contrast areas. This is probably a bad example. There's actually a purple light behind this camera, so probably a bad example for that one. But a nice gentle fall off, and then towards the edge you start to see some of the busyness that can come out in the bokeh at f1.2. Shot of the Contax 167, same scenario here, but again, good sharpness in the middle of the frame. Nice quick fall off, gentle fall off to the focus areas or out of focus areas. Corners are good. A little bit of a soap bubble kind of bokeh happening here with the AE1 that we just looked at, but again, very pleasing, and I think another reason that people really enjoy this lens. Okay, finally, I wanted to call up the scenario with Sasha, our dog. This is a really a torture test of a scenario for the lens. You've got a very, very strongly backlit subject. Sasha herself has some white fur, which accentuates that highlights, tending to be blown out. So you've got a backlit subject, a lot of detail with the hair here. We'll zoom in and we'll see here. We're at 200% now. And you can get a feel for what's happening. Now you do have some sharpness here. You do see fine details, the little dimples on her nose. I don't know if this is coming through YouTube or not, but you can definitely see some dimples on her nose and the fuzz of the hair, the little individual hairs here. But obviously you've got a ton of chromatic aberration happening. You lose resolution quite a bit, and almost a little bit of a veiling flare to this image with a strong backlight. But this is about as bad as it gets. So given that, I think it's pretty good. But what I did want to illustrate with this image is that when you stop down to f2, it becomes a whole nother lens. So this is obviously Sasha didn't sit still, but this next image here is about as close as I could get. Still a little bit lower in the contrast, but definitely improved over f1.2. And if we zoom in here, we'll get to 200%. You get a lot more contrast, a lot more detail. It's almost like the lens cleaned itself up and is ready for business at f2. So you almost get that 2-in-1 lens combo that's more characteristic from some of the older lenses. You've got the dreamy effect at f1.2. And then we see a nice cleanup as far as contrast and sharpness at f2. And again, this was all on APS-C sensors through the XE4. Okay, here we are taking a look at the GFX sensor performance. The first shot here I actually converted to black and white. I just liked it like this. So you're not going to notice any chromatic aberration or green or purple fringing with this. But it is a good illustration of center sharpness and nice gentle fall off. It also does give you a more dreamy type feel, I think, on the GFX sensor. Maybe a little hard to tell here with a darker background, but I like the pop of the white on the black. And we'll dig into a little bit more images that kind of show off what the characteristics of this lens look like on the GFX. But as you can see, plenty of center sharpness here. I don't think resolution right out of the bat or right off the bat is an issue. And again, this is open at wide open at f1.2. Moving on to an outdoor scene. I did more outdoor shots on the GFX. It just happened to be where I was when I was testing this lens out. Here we're going to see some challenges with resolution, image resolution. Now, I had intended to focus on this center peony bud with some ants crawling on it. Unfortunately, this is obviously difficult to focus at 1.2 on a medium format camera. I ended up front focusing a little bit, so we've got some stuff down here in focus so you can get an idea for sharpness. Here we are at 300%. You can clearly make out the ant crawling on the peony buds. You've got some nice green leaf here happening. But yeah, overall a pretty solid performance for wide open center and maybe even mid-frame sharpness as we tend out towards the corners a little bit. Had I nailed the focus on the center, I think we would have been pretty happy with what we saw here. But this is also a good example of out of focus blur and bokeh. It does get a little busy and soap bubbly, especially on the GFX sensor. You can tell that right here in the right hand corner, this tree, a little soap bubbly. We do have some chromatic aberration happening in the background here. A little busy. It's not super smooth at f1.2, but we will see that change in a little bit here. Moving on to another shot of the flowers, you start to get a feel for what bokeh looks like in, I'd say, maybe a mid-distance. So this flower in the front, center of the frame is probably about 2 feet to 3 feet away. In the background, you've got, I think this is actually a gravel path, the white here, and then some trees and greenery in the background. That was probably anywhere from 15 to 30 feet away. So a nice fall off, but again, it is a little swirly, a little busy, but it does have that vintage look for bokeh that maybe you're interested in. So just wanted to highlight that. We see that again in another wide open shot at f1.2. Here's at this. I wanted to talk about the bokeh again. You do get some chromatic aberration even in the highlights, in the kind of out of focus areas with the highlights here. So you see some green fringing. There is green on the ground, so it's not all just fringing, but you can definitely tell where it is at these kind of transition points between bright light and darker areas. Again, maybe a little busier than you'd like. I think it's fine. I'm kind of partial to it, but I can understand if you're looking for a little something a little bit more smooth. All right, another shot of the peony. This time more in focus. Still a little bit of fringing here. Not necessarily super sharp at f1.2. Kind of dreamy, but you know what? That's probably what you're going for with a lens like this. You can see a much smoother focus fall off here. This is again at f1.2. So quite a big difference between what we looked at previously with the more soap bubble busy aspect of the bokeh and the background as opposed to what we see here. This is much further out, maybe 100 to 200 meters out this line of trees, but you see this nice gentle fall off, which is really pleasing. All right, so I did want to talk about vignette a little bit. If you take a look at this image, we're almost towards an infinity focus, and you can clearly see the vignette kicking in. You may read online people talking about how this lens doesn't vignette that well. It covers the full sensor just fine. So-so, okay? There's definitely vignette here. You're going to have a hard time fixing it entirely. Even if I go to shape here in the Capture One dialog box, we go to light fall off. You're going to be doing a significant amount of correction here to get to a place where it lines up. Already we've lost contrast in those corners, kind of over exceeding the brightness of the actual image, and you're seeing some weird stuff happening down here in the bottom right with this kind of gray correction. You've still got this kind of brown little corner popping out, and this is almost at a 100+ light fall off correction in Capture One. So it's definitely present. It's definitely something to be aware of. Here's another shot showing the same thing. You're really not going to be able to correct for a lot of these things, and you've got to just shoot with them in mind. So here's the full 120 correction. This chimney for record was probably 40 to 50 feet away. Again, more of a, it seems like more infinity will bring up the more towards infinity, I guess I should say. The vignette will become more apparent. Closer up, it's not too big of a deal. It's still present, but not as bad as if the image or subject of the image is further away. Here's an example where you can kind of use this vignette to your effect to highlight the center of your scene. If your corners are not critical, if it's not a huge deal to have those perfectly even and clear corners, then something like this will work just fine. So here we are with the comparison images. Now what I wanted to do was take one shot with the XE4 and one shot with the GFX sensor, and then kind of look at them together. Now obviously with the focal length differences and the crop factors, I couldn't line these up perfectly, but I wanted to at least make an attempt to give you a view into what the optical performance looks like and what the imaging capabilities look like across each platform. So the first image in each set is going to be the GFX. In this case, I believe I used a GFX 50S, and then we've got the XE4 following up immediately after. So this is wide open at 50 millimeters f1.2. Typically, I've tried to focus on this door handle here because I think it gave us some good contrast and a good target to shoot for. Sharpness here on the 50S or the GFX sensor is not the greatest, but it's not bad either. It's kind of got a smooth definition to it. You do see some green fringing and purple fringing in here. Not terrible, but it does have a nice kind of effect to it. Moving on to the XE4, you look at the door handle again, you've got much more pronounced chromatic aberration, which is interesting since this is the APS-C sensor. You think it would be exaggerated on the medium format sensor, but what we see here is kind of the opposite. Much stronger green and purple fringing. The detail, I think, is very good. It's probably a bit sharper than what we saw in the GFX, but again, these are wide open, kind of dreamy view. You've got a little bit of bokeh back here with the vase or whatever this is. Kind of a little bit of a soap bubble thing going on. Let me go back to the GFX sensor and see if we saw that. Yeah, I guess we see kind of the same thing on the GFX as well. So pretty even performance. A little bit difference because of the focal length, which will be consistent throughout. But let's go ahead and take a look at f2. And you'll notice I've got the apertures indicated up here with keywords. Obviously, we see a big increase in sharpness. Things clean up here. This is 200%. We've got a decrease in the chromatic aberration, less purple and green fringing. Overall, a cleaner image, even into the corners here. Pretty decent across the field sharpness. Not a ton of distortion either. So pretty impressive performance, in my opinion, at f2 for the GFX sensor. Now, if we move on to the XE4 and the APS-C sensor, again, almost the same thing. Sharpness is cleaned up, less chromatic aberration. In fact, we don't see a ton of purple here at all. You do see some green in the background, but overall, a good, clean image at f2, and that's kind of what we've seen with this lens. You step down to f2, you've got a whole different lens. Moving into f4, we have the GFX sensor here, really starting to get kind of almost a modern sharpness. Kind of a very clinical look, very clean, very detailed, good rendering here. We don't see a ton of out of focus, green or purple fringing at all. So really clean image, even down here into the very far corners. Really sharp, very well detailed. So this lens, in my opinion, is a great one to use on medium format if you're going to stop down to 2.8 to f4. You get great across the frame sharpness, and you'll notice even the vignettes have cleaned up quite a bit. So hard to tell perfectly in this image, but they don't seem to be too distracting. Moving on to the APS-C sensor, again, same story. Things have cleaned up quite a bit. I think I just misfocused here. This is at 200%. Typically this would be sharper, so I think you can kind of take the performance on the GFX level to be consistent here. This should clean up a bit better, a lot more sharpness coming out of this at f4. Reduced fringing as well. Nice background fall off. So overall, a really competent lens at f4 on the APS-C Fuji X platform. Okay, let's talk about cost and availability. Being 50 plus years old at this point, availability can be slim depending on the marketplaces you have access to. As of filming, MPB has no copies of the lens in stock. KEH has various versions of the lens and about 7 copies in total, ranging from $250 for an ugly rated lens to $775 for their EX rated version of the lens. Most everyone has access to eBay, and you might find a local seller in your country, and I would expect to pay anywhere from $400 to $600 or US dollars equivalent for the lens. Now, if all else fails, you can pick up a copy from the ever-present Japanese camera stores on eBay. Just pay attention to the descriptions. Many of those lenses can have fungus, scratches, or other issues that you really need to watch out for. If you're in the US and very patient, try some of the larger camera forums like Fred Miranda. Overall, the Minolta Rokkor 58 1.2 is a time capsule. It's a piece of photographic history that still has a place in the present. Now, it's not for pixel peepers, and it's not for those who need clinical sharpness, but if you're after that unique, more storied vintage look, and you're looking for a more connected shooting experience, I think it's worth a try. So that's it for today, folks. A journey through time with the Minolta Rokkor 58 1.2 on 2 Fuji cameras. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. It'll help us make more of this content in the future. Until next time, I'm Brandon. Thanks for watching Heritage Focus.